position just before Officer Camacho fired the first 2 rounds. And you can see clearly that Noble's right hand was, in fact, concealed behind his back, causing officers to believe that he was, in fact, concealing a firearm in his rear waistband. The second photo is right after Officer Camacho fired the first 2 rounds and Dylan Noble fell to the ground face down with one of his arms underneath him, and it was within a relatively short period of time that he did roll onto his back that you'll see in the third photo. This is the photograph, shows Noble's position after he did roll himself over onto his back, and you can see that Noble's hands were close to his body but were not concealed during that brief moment. The next photo does show Dylan Noble reaching with his right hand underneath his shirt into the waistband area in what appears to the officers that he is in fact retrieving a handgun from his waistband. It is at that time that Officer Camacho fired the 3rd round. This photo shows Noble's position just after Camacho fired the 3rd round, and you can see that Noble moved his right hand away from his body. From the time of the 3rd round until the time of the next photograph, when Officer Chavez fired the shotgun, there was a 14-second time period that had elapsed. It was during that 14-second time period that I believe that other alternatives could have been explored and employed to prevent that 4th round from being fired. And this last photograph clearly shows Noble's position after the 3rd round was fired, and just as Chavez fired from his shotgun, again, Noble had clearly placed his right hand under his shirt into the waistband area, leading the officers to believe that he was in fact retrieving a handgun. I have looked at this photo and this video well over 50 times and had the luxury of sitting in my office and looking at this investigation as well as all the video. And I have not come to the conclusion that in fact that wasn't a handgun. And these officers had to make that decision in a relatively short period of time, within seconds. However, as I said during the news conference, I still believe during that 14-second period, other alternatives could have been explored that would have minimized the chance for that 4th round having to be fired. And those are other tactics. With that, I'll open up to any questions you might have.
Chief, how much time between after the third, before the 3rd shot, when you said both hands were visible, and then when the 3rd shot happened?
There was it took him, he was face down after the first 2 rounds. He was there for just under 4 seconds or thereabouts. And it was at that time that he rolled over onto his back. Within 3 seconds, his right hand reached into his waistband when Officer Camacho fired the 3rd round. 3 seconds when he was on his back, when he was being given commands, when Officer Camacho made the decision to fire after he deliberately reached into his waistband. So 3 seconds on his back.
How difficult was it for you personally to make this determination that maybe something else could have been done?
Well, Gene, I've wrestled with this decision more than perhaps any decision that I've wrestled with as a police chief. It has been the thing that keeps me up at night and the first thing I think about when I wake up in the morning. I wrestle with it because I know that these police officers have an extremely difficult job to do in a very dangerous environment. And when you look around our country today and the number of officers that are being shot and ambushed and killed, it made my decision even more difficult. And I've had many discussions and internal debates with staff and the 4 deputy chiefs that stand up here with me today. We all concur that this is the right decision. The finding is that the officer's use of deadly force was within policy, all 4 rounds. However, the decision was also made that inappropriate tactics were utilized between the 3rd and 4th round that may have minimized the chance for that 4th round to have to be fired. Something that may or could have occurred during that time prior to Noble deliberately reaching into his waistband in what appeared to be retrieving a firearm. So it was a very difficult decision. I do not want to ever lose the trust of this community. It is so important and near and dear to me as a police chief. This community must trust me to hold our officers accountable, set forth policy and training that is going to allow our officers to go out there and protect them and serve them in the right way. And I also know that I have to have the support of the officers that work for me, and they need to feel that they are supported by me and my staff so that they can go out there and do their job effectively. That is a very, very delicate balance for a police chief. And when I render a decision like I've rendered today, I've tried to take everything into consideration and to be as fair and objective as I possibly can in doing the right thing for the right reason for this department and for this community. And I believe that I have. I believe this is a situation where it is not any ill will or malicious intent on the part of the officers to do anything wrong that day. These officers came to work with the intent to protect and serve. And ultimately they were thrust into a situation where they had to make some split-second decisions in order to protect their life and the lives of citizens nearby. They did that with goodwill. They did that with a good heart and a good intent. But I also know in those situations, sometimes we have to consider other tactics that may be available to us, which is why I believe every officer in this organization needs to be further trained in those areas that I spoke about. How to approach a wounded suspect, how to approach somebody with a diminished threat. What are some of the alternatives that we can consider tactically that can allow officers to have more time to make a better informed decision? And those are the things that we're going to do through training. And we're also going to be and have been researching nationwide how other departments use canines when it deals with the individual who is possibly armed and no firearm has been seen. Those things are being researched so that we can make sure that the Fresno Police Department has the very best policies in place. And then making sure that we have the equipment modifications necessary that will allow our officers to do their job safely and to keep our citizens safe. And we know in this incident and others, it's important that when officers do arm themselves with a long rifle or a shotgun, that they are able to transition away from that weapon so that they consider other types of tactics or the use of less lethal shotgun or a taser or perhaps their handgun or to go hands-on with an individual who may be on the ground. Those things are all being discussed internally, and I believe this is unique. This is unique to law enforcement across this nation. And the fact that these circumstances are very, very rare. And there is absolutely no way that we can train our officers to approach every single situation that may come their way. But we're going to do our very best to make sure that we do those things that ensure the safety of our officers and our citizens as we address these types of incidents.
Chief, do you know whether that last round was the round that took Dilly's life?
That is a question that's going to be best answered by the coroner, whether or not the first round, second round, third round, or fourth round, or a combination of those rounds were the fatal rounds. I can tell you what's in the criminal investigation, and it appears to be that any of those rounds could have been fatal based on where those rounds struck. That is something that's going to have to be truly determined by the experts and not by me. And what I look at is policy violations and whether or not there are additional things that we can do with policy training and corrective measures in this instance.
Chief, what would you say to the Noble family?
Well, my statement to the Noble family has been the same all along. As I'm sorry that this incident occurred. I'm sorry that Dylan Noble lost his life. But I think we all recognize that there were some contributing factors here, and that these officers were put in a position where they felt the need to use deadly force because they felt that their life was threatened. and they felt other citizens' lives were threatened. And it's unfortunate, and it is a tragedy. But the officers did not initiate this incident. What put them in the frame of mind to have a concern for their safety was the fact that Dylan Noble failed to pull over, was the fact that he failed to comply with repeated commands, in excess of 35 commands, where he was asked or directed to show his hands. And so much of this was brought on by Dylan Noble. In fact, all of it, this entire incident. And so I feel for the family, I really, really do. And I can't imagine losing a loved one like that in an incident like this. But at the same time, these officers, these are dedicated officers. These are officers that are veterans that have the intent and the desire to go out and do good every day in our community. And they are good officers. They just happen to be put in a situation where the circumstances were such that were outside of their control.
Chief, looking to the future, how do you think this will impact future situations where an officer feels they do need to use deadly force?
Well, I believe that decisions such as this, along with the training and any other things that we do internally, will have an impact on how officers approach certain incidents. However, having said that, I also believe that when an officer faces a situation where he believes or she believes that their life or the life of another is in jeopardy, they're going to respond appropriately based on their training and based on what they believe and see at the time. That's why it's so important that we judge these officers based on what they knew at that time. And it's my hope that they will still continue to feel supported, and that they will go out there and continue to do their job in a manner in which I expect them to.
How soon will these policies and tactics be implemented?
The actual training has already been developed and will be implemented beginning starting in late January. Training that we are providing to our officers is part of the next perishable skills training to all of our officers, and that training will be done within the next year. In terms of the policy modifications, if there are any, that will be done as soon as we finalize our research, hopefully in the next 3 to 4 months, that we can have a look at our policy to see how it compares to others. I think it's important to know that our policies and procedures are considered to be best practice because we utilize a company called Lexipol, who establishes policy for agencies across California. And so we believe they are best practices, but it's always beneficial to continue to do that research. And the equipment will be done here within the next 60 to 90 days as well.
Chief, can you clarify what actions, if any, were taken against the officers involved?
I'm not able to. The penal code section is very, very clear under 832.7. It precludes a police chief from publicly stating what corrective measures are taking against its employees, and that is prohibited by law. But I can tell you, as a police chief, I am entrusted by this community to hold people accountable that work for me. And I take that very, very seriously, and I do in this case as well. And sometimes holding people accountable could include discipline, it could include training, or a combination thereof. And that's what we want to be the outcome from this, is that we are addressing the issues that are before us, and that we're going to minimize the chance from this occurring in the future, knowing full well we can't control the actions of others when they choose not to allow a situation to de-escalate.
Would you be able to comment, are they still members of the force? Is that changing?
These officers are being provided with the additional training along with all the other officers in this department.
Have you talked to the officer? How is he handling the outcome of your investigation?
I have talked to the officers involved in this investigation numerous times, and without going into details, I have to tell you that both of these officers have been impacted, as well as their families, as a result of this incident. The threats that have been made on social media against these officers and their families. This is not something they brought upon themselves. This is something they were thrust into during the course of the day, and so they hurt. These officers hurt. They hurt emotionally. They are human beings, just like all of us in this room, and I'm sure they are emotionally impacted by this. I know they are. Okay. With that, we'll conclude the interview. We'll get these photos sent out to each and every one of you in the media. And again, thank you for your time and your patience in this case. Thank you.